I owe some people an apology. 15 years ago, I considered myself a conservative Republican. And believe it or not, I meant well. Hi, I'm Nate Charles, and welcome back to the Rule of Law Brief. One of the issues I remember arguing about most passionately was the Supreme Court's 2013 decision in Shelby County v. Holder. For those who don't remember, Shelby County effectively dismantled the Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance system, the requirement that certain jurisdictions with a history of racial discrimination obtain federal approval before changing their voting law. At the time, supporters of the Voting Rights Act pointed to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's famous dissent. She argued that eliminating preclearance was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you were not getting wet. And I disagreed. Not because I thought racism was gone, not because I thought that bigotry had disappeared altogether. I knew there was still rain. My argument was different. I thought that the umbrella had become too heavy. I believed at the time that the Voting Rights Act imposed an extraordinary burden on state sovereignty, and I thought the conditions that justified that burden had largely receded. Now, I knew that racism and bigotry still existed, but I thought it was mostly at the margins. I thought that the rain had become a drizzle. I was wrong. Not a little wrong. I was profoundly wrong. And looking back, I realized that my mistake wasn't really about the Shelby County case in particular, and it wasn't even really about voting rights. In fact, it wasn't even about one particular issue at all. My mistake was much broader. I fundamentally misjudged and misunderstood how secure civil rights gains had been in the United States. I thought that the battles over race had largely been won. I thought that battles over religious pluralism had largely been won. I thought that battles over equal treatment for women had largely been won. I thought that the battles over dignity and equality for LGBTQ Americans had largely been won. Not completely won, not perfectly won, but won enough that the remaining prejudice had been pushed to the margins. I was wrong about that too. Now, I'm recording this on June 3rd, 2026, the beginning of Pride Month. And there was a time when I looked at the progress made by the LGBTQ plus community and thought, good, they've won. Not in the sense that the prejudice had disappeared. I knew there would always be some people with ugly views. But I thought those views had become politically and culturally marginalized. I thought gay Americans had achieved a level of security where the fundamental battles had largely been settled. And again, I was wrong. I was grossly and profoundly wrong. Over the last decade, mostly since 2016, I have watched politicians, commentators, and activists devote enormous amounts of time and energy to relitigating questions that I genuinely thought had already been answered. I have watched elected officials tell Muslims that they don't belong in American society. I have watched public figures portray entire religious groups as fundamentally incompatible with America. I have watched people openly question whether LGBTQ plus Americans deserve equal dignity and equal protection under the law. I have watched immigrants and racial minorities turned into convenient political punching bags. And the most disturbing thing of all is that I have also watched millions of Americans cheer. The lesson I've learned in the last 15 years is not that some people are still bigots. It's that the bigotry was never really marginalized the way that I thought it was. The lesson was and remains that bigotry is alive and well in the United States. The rain never stopped. To borrow Ruth Bader Ginsburg's analogy, I grossly underestimated the storm. So this is the part where I say something that I think more Americans need to be willing to say. I was wrong. I fundamentally misjudged the character of my own country. I grossly underestimated the prevalence of hatred. I misjudged how fragile some of our institutions really were. And I'm sorry. But there is a second lesson here. Being wrong is not the problem. Ignorance is not a moral failing. Refusing to learn absolutely is. I don't get to hide behind the veil of what I believed 15 years ago. I don't get to pretend I haven't seen what I've seen. I don't get to use ignorance as an excuse anymore. And neither do you. At some point, every one of us has to make a decision. When reality contradicts our assumptions, do we change our assumptions? Or do we just deny reality? The good news is I've learned my lesson. The bad news is I no longer have the luxury of claiming ignorance. We have all seen enough. We have all heard enough. We know what is happening now. We know what is being said. We know who is being targeted. The question is no longer whether we understand the problem. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And as for me, I've made my decision. I was wrong. I learned. I adjusted my thinking accordingly. And for however long it takes, I intend to do everything within my legal, ethical, and constitutional power to oppose bigotry, defend equal dignity, and help build a country where people are judged by the content of their character rather than the accident of their birth, their religion, their ethnicity, their gender, or whom they love. Because once you've learned better, you have an obligation to do better. And I intend to fix my mistakes. I intend to be part of the solution.